Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 60 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me, as always, my fellow traveller on the road of counselling theory and all things interesting, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
I am very well indeed, Rory. It's good to see you because I can share. We do these over Skype, so you can't see us listening to this, but we can see one another. But it's a great episode. Episode number 60, we're going to be opening by looking at self-care, something that is so important. And I think it's timeless as well at the moment because as we run into Christmas, breaks, some people being alone, I think self-care is something we need to concentrate on. Theory with Rory, really interesting. And I believe, Rory, an ethical imperative as well, which we'll be getting to later. But we're going to be looking at cognitive development, specifically in children. Can you kind of just give us a flavour of that?
Yeah, the theory is a well-known and well-taught theory. It's covered in a lot of child therapy courses, and it's the work of Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. And I'm going to be talking about stages of cognitive development.
Nice. Looking forward to that one. And I believe you have another one of Rory's super handouts that we can look forward to from that. And then we're going to be ending today's episode 60, looking at an old familiar friend. And this is the familiar friend of comparing and contrasting modalities of therapy. However, we're going to be putting a focus today on looking at the humanistic models. So something to look forward to because compare and contrast, it's asked all the time in those assignments. But let's kick off with that important topic, of self-care. And of course, this came in from our Facebook group because we ask you to set the agenda for these podcasts. And of course, if you're not a member of the Counselling Tutor Facebook group, you can become a member by just going to Facebook and typing Counselling Tutor in, and we're the one at the top. And if you just knock on the door and say you want to join, our moderation team will let you in, and you too can suggest a topic. But what topic has been suggested and who suggested that, Rory?
Well, it's Claire Manton, so hi to you, Claire. And she said, how do you cope as a mother and a partner when there's a bereavement in the family and find it hard to cut myself between all the people and need me? And the strap line is feeling overwhelmed. So, yes, Claire, well, first of all, I hope things aren't too difficult for you at the moment. It is always difficult when you have to juggle so many responsibilities and do the course as well. And self-care is an ethical imperative. It's something that the BACP say that we should aspire to, but it really is tricky if you've got so much on. My view is that you need to take care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, then how are you going to be caring for others? And sometimes, as I've said many times in the past, selfish gets a bad press. Sometimes you have to put yourself first. What do you say, Ken?
Definitely, and it's back to that old, when you're on an aeroplane, you need to put your oxygen, if there's an emergency, you need to put your oxygen mask on first to be able to help others. And I think that as counsellors, psychotherapists, even when we're training, we need to look into self. And I like this question. I think it's a well-informed question, and it shows self-awareness to say, you know what, I can feel that I'm starting to feel maybe overwhelmed. And those are the warning signs. And just pushing through regardless and going, oh, well, what can you do? You just got to get on with it anyway, is not a way to go, specifically in the work that we do, because we need to be there with our oxygen masks on to help others. And when we start feeling those signs, when we see those symptoms in ourselves, it's time to reach out, as you did with that question, to speak to our supervisors and to look at our own personal therapy as well. Personal therapy, again, an ethical imperative. If we are feeling overwhelmed, we need to go and get that sorted out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Putting ourselves first and looking after ourselves is no bad thing. And I sometimes think, knowing therapists as I do through the years, it's the one thing we're really bad at. We're very good with other people, looking after other people. But as Rogers himself said, he said recently, I'll paraphrase, I'm taking a little bit more care of myself. He said, I've realised I've got to look after myself a bit more. And I think he was 72 when he said that, so he was a bit of a late learner. And I'll share a little bit with the audience. And indeed, Claire, my mother died halfway through my counselling training, my diploma year, and I'm not a mother, and but I did have a family and commitments and all the other stuff that I know that a lot of counselling trainees are going through. And I took the view to come out of practice just to make sure that I was okay and just to take the pressure off. And I came out of practice, and guess what? I was the first person to finish my cohort. I walked in on the last day with my box, because we had a little box, with everything done. I was the first person that finished my course. Hours, supervision, everything. So sometimes it can feel, overwhelming. If I drop this ball, I'm never going to finish. But actually, my experience was, I did.
Yeah, that self-care, and it just shows the benefit that you receive from that, from being able to cross that finish line. And I guess if we just try to carry on in spite of the fact that we're facing those challenges, we may not reach that finish line, be able to get there. And I had a similar experience where my mother passed away. I was tutoring at the time with Rory, and I had my class, but I recognized pretty quickly that I needed to pull out of practice. And I pulled out of practice for 8 months. Because I found that as clients were bringing anything about loss or bereavement or cancer, because my mother died from cancer, my mind was no longer within their frame of reference. I was thinking about my own stuff, and speaking with my supervisor, the decision was made to pull out of practice. But the main point here is about speaking about it, and you can even speak to your peers about it, or a good friend who you can lean on at times of difficulty, and just say what it's like and what you're carrying. And I know, Rory, I sometimes bend your ear with the stuff that's going on for me, and I see that as a strength, definitely not a weakness, to be able to speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, we spend our lives saying to clients, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to look after yourself. It's okay to put yourself first. And it's a case of, as they say, physician, heal thyself. It's okay telling other people to do it, but telling yourself can sometimes be tricky. So that's you asked how to cope, Claire, and I hope we've answered your questions. And again, mine and Ken's very best wishes to you. I hope things aren't too difficult for you.
And just on that topic, just to close that off nicely, we're just mindful that this podcast is going out just before what is celebrated by some as Christmas, but it is a festive season, and it is maybe a season where we're expected to be joyful and happy, and any advert we see tells us how much of a good time we should be having. But I recognize that there can be sadness of loss and memories of people that are maybe not around at this time, for us as practitioners, for our clients. And it's just that time to maybe think about what that means. And maybe that's a good discussion for personal development group. Maybe that's a good discussion for the Facebook group as well, because that is about self-care.
Absolutely. So I hope that's answered your question. And I'm sure that you're not the only person, Claire, who's asking that question. I think you've just been very courageous in putting it into a public forum and asking for help. So I'm sure that other people will benefit from your question, without a doubt.
Indeed. Keep those questions coming on the Facebook group, because we do use them to inform what we bring to you in our podcast. And of course, now moving into that theory with Rory, always exciting, but today especially important to, I guess, tune in your ears and listen very carefully, because you mentioned to me just in our preamble before we went into this, Rory, that this links into an ethical requirement that we have as counsellors, psychotherapists.
It does. Yes, it's 28B of the BACP ethical framework. Not that I have it on my bedside table. But it does state that we need to understand. I might be able to quote it for you. I might actually have it up here. We need to understand. Here we go. It's 28. Careful consideration will be given to working with children and young people. So this is very much about children and young people. And it says, takes account of their capacity to give informed consent, whether it is appropriate to seek the consent of others who have parental responsibility for the young person and their best interest. But more tellingly, demonstrates knowledge, so knowledge and skills about ways of working that are appropriate to a young person's maturity and understanding. And what I'm going to be covering is just a behemoth, that means giant, a behemoth in child development, and that is the work of Jean Piaget. He was a Swiss practitioner who, I think I'm right in saying, he studied his own children to develop the foundations of his theory, and it's taught in child courses and child and adolescent therapy courses. I was taught it. So important, and it really does link to a lecture that I've recently given in the Counselling Study Resource about working with bereavement, children who are bereaved. And one of the key things is that you have to understand what they understand at their developmental age. Just so important. So if you want to be if you want to be a child practitioner, or you're thinking of going into that world, really isn't to be missed. But Jean Piaget gives us the building blocks of cognitive development. In other words, the shorthand is what children will be able to understand and comprehend at the age that they are.
Let's get straight in and listen to Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
One of the benefits of having a grandson is to be able to apply very gently some of the psychological theories that I've learnt through the years. And one of those theories that I'm going to talk about today is Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Now, cognitive development is basically how our brains work, how our brains are structured, and how that structuring influences the things that we can do. Now, Piaget was a Swiss developmental psychologist, and I seem to remember that he was a zoologist, primarily trained in zoology, and then he went to look at psychology in humans. And as part of that, and there's a lot of psychological theorists do, he studied his own children. There's quite a precedent for psychologists studying their own children. And he developed a theory of how children develop. And this is called Piaget Stages of Cognitive Development. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the stages and just talk a little bit about how children develop. So Piaget hypothesized that from birth to 6 weeks, children have sensation really through reflexive behaviours such as movement or touching. And those things are like sucking or moving with the eyes. That's really noticeable when the child's being fed, because they tend to make eye contact with whoever's feeding them. And this links in to them feeling safe in the world. And also it links in with them feeling a sense of security. At that time, the child may rely, as they do for a long time, on the parents for their own sense of security. From 6 weeks to 4 months, they beget habits, and really the main focus is on their own body. They suck, they chew, they rub their faces. I don't think there's a parent in the world who's not been worried about child scratching the faces, and people sometimes buy scratching gloves. And they repeat a lot of behaviours, so they might continually kind of poke the finger in their ear, that type of thing. For 4 to 8 months, they become a little bit outside focused. So sometimes it's called being object orientated, and they repeat actions that give pleasurable results. And the finger in the ear, I think, is a classic one for those of you children. They poke the finger in their ear or up the nose, and they seem to be quite happy about that. And parents perennially are pulling children's fingers out of their ears. And they also start to be able to grasp things. At 8 months, they're grasping objects. So they might not be fully coordinated, but they grasp, and they can throw objects, and sometimes they slap objects off a tray or off the floor. From 8 to 12 months, coordination of vision and touch, hand-eye coordination. And Piaget talks a lot about schemas, and schemas are really cognitive maps of the world. So if you think of a map of the world, a child's world being maybe the front room of your house, or where they sleep, their bedroom, they navigate round that. And there's actually a little game you can play. I don't know if any of you understand the history of Heidi Peak, or now Heidi Peak, we all do that with our children, don't we? We hide behind a towel, or we hide behind a door and go Heidi Peak. And the reason for that is to help children develop the idea that we exist when they can't see us, believe it or not. And part of the 8 to 12 month scheme is children are beginning to understand that we're still there when we're not there. I don't know how many parents have sung when they've had to go in the other room. And, we sing, I know I do as a grandparent. And the interesting thing about that is that children begin to understand that actually, just because they can't see us, we still exist. And 8 to 12 months also focus on goal orientation, which is how they make their steps. And that translates certainly to my grandson, of him running or crawling very quickly along the ground, trying to unplug the wires in my television set. This seems to be a continuing goal that he's got. And if anybody's not looking, he's like lightning as he tries to pull wires out of the back. From 12 to 18 months, infants or children are now really becoming interested in properties of objects, so how things work, and that really translates to how they work with objects. Lots of toys are interactive, and you see musical toys where a button is pressed and the music plays or a voice plays. Well, that's it. And at this time, Piaget kind of gave us the sense of children being a young scientist. They're really conducting little experiments to see what happens. And if I look at my grandson, I notice that he touches everything with one finger. He risks one finger as he pokes or touches, just to see what will happen. It's almost like a scientist gently exploring the world around them, but not wanting to risk a full hand. And then finally, we have between 18 to 12 months something that Piaget called the internalisation of schemas. So that really means that Piaget was talking about that the map of the world now becomes more internalised to the child. And they can become a bit more creative, they have a bit more insight, and they have enduring mental maps of the world. And in that, that's something like when a child starts to paint, or use paints or draws, that type of thing. They'll draw stick pictures of mum or dad or caregivers. And that is the stage 6 of Piaget's idea. He also talks about the pre-operational stage, which is a second stage, and it's where the child begins to speak, and that can last up till the age of 7. And children playing and pretending. So for those of you who've got children 7 and above, you'll see they become very creative. And this is where some children find their acting ability. It's really interesting for those of you who follow the program Stranger Things. There's a character played by Millie Bobby Brown. Some of you will have watched it, some of you won't. But basically, she's a psychic child. That's the best way to put it. What's interesting about Millie Bobby Brown, the actor, is that she started being creatively as an actor at around the age of 8, which kind of links in really well with this pre-operational stage. This imagination, if it's harnessed in a certain way, can help children be very creative. Musical instrument, acting, singing, that type of thing. And you see a lot of children going to dance classes. And they also form quite stable concepts and sometimes magical beliefs. They'll believe in things. And as part of that, that is what's called the pre-operational stage. Piaget also talks about the symbolic functional substage. And this is really about transforming concepts into logical ideas. And this is from about 2 to 4 years of age. They'll be able to communicate things in a reasonably logical way. But they sometimes have a little bit of difficulty with egotism and pre-causal thinking. So in other words, magical thinking, where they won't do something because they have an irrational fear of it. Or they might on the other hand, be egotists, where they feel that they can do anything without any consequence, and parents have to rein them in a bit. And then Piaget talks about the intuitive thought substage. This is for children between 4 and 7, and this is where they become, very interested in the world. They start asking questions, and they use primitive, not very sophisticated reasoning. One of those pieces of reasoning would be, my friend's got one, so why can't I have one? And one of the interesting pieces of research that Piaget did is the beakers reasoning. What he did was he presented a child with 2 cups of water, identical, and they had the same amount of liquid in. And the children was able to work out that they had the same amount of liquid. But if one glass was poured into a taller, thinner glass, so it's the same liquid but in a different glass, that could be a bit confusing for the child. He couldn't comprehend that the same amount of liquid was in a taller, thinner glass. And then finally, we have, well, not finally, but we do have the concrete operational stage. Now, this is where children between 7 and 11 become more logical. They can hypothesize, and they can use reasoning, so they can work out things. And you usually see this in children if they're watching programs. They can usually watch a TV program or read a book and try and work out what the character's motivation is. And they can say, well, I think he's going to do that. And we see that in our children a lot. So that really is Piaget's theory of development. The final one really is the formal operational stage, which takes children through adolescence to adulthood. And they are capable of abstract thought. And this is really important for young people who are going into counselling, because when children go into counselling, we have to be thoughtful of their cognitive stages. I recently touched on this in a lecture on grief and said that you have to be really, really sure that the child understands what they're asking for. But between the ages of 15 and 20, children are able to do abstract thought. So you can see that in the way that they read books, that they, books on other universes, they're always popular. The Harry Potter classic idea of abstract thinking, people flying on broomsticks and magic and wands, and that's quite abstract. And also something called metacognition. That's a really wordy word. It's really means thinking about thinking. So at this point, certainly in school, metacognition really means that you'll give a child a task, and then they'll think about where they can get the resources to fulfill that task, where they can find it, and where they can get the information to fulfill the task. And finally, problem solving. And that's using trial and error. So that's a really good indication that the formal operational stage in Piaget's work is working, because you give them a problem and they can use deductive reasoning. So that is the work of Jean Piaget. He's quite a big thinker in the world of child development. And I think the most important thing, if you're writing an essay on Piaget, is to realise that it's about human intelligence, and it's about the stages of it. So it's about developmental theory. So really, Piaget was talking about how children's intelligence develops through the arc of birth right up to really 15, 20 years of old. I've included a handout from a recent lecture, which is on bereavement, and it shows one particular stage of bereavement and how the child might understand it. And I'm going to set you a little challenge. You might want to come into the forums on the CSR or in our Facebook page and try and share what you think about this. But this handout that I've put in really, really does link to one of the stages. So my challenge to you is try and link it up. See if you can link the stage up to the handout on grief. It's quite clear, so have a look at it and feedback and tell us what you think.
Thank you as always, Rory. It's so informative, and a great handout that you have created for everybody, and that is the stages, those stages of cognitive development that we can look out for in children. But Rory, there's a bonus this time as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what that bonus is?
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my lecture slides from the lecture in the CSR, one of the stages that children are in, and I'm going to attach it so that you can look at the chronological age and what they may understand about grief. So, and I'm going to link it to Piaget's cognitive stages, so that you can have a look at that and you can think, oh, this particular age would understand this much about grief. It's just one of the slides from the lecture I've just given.
Thank you. That is very generous of you, and we all love your handouts. I get so many emails about them. If you want to get Rory's handout, how do you do that? Well, 2 ways to do it. The first way is you just go to our website, that is counsellingtutor.com. If you click on the podcasts tab, it lists all of the podcasts that we have done. Choose episode number 60. You will get to the show notes of today's podcast episode, and right there from within that page you can download Rory's handouts that he's just mentioned, including that bonus. Alternatively, if you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource or a member of the Handouts Vault, well, that's already been put into the Handouts Vault for you, so you just need to log into your Counselling Study Resource and you can access that immediately online or print it out. And if you're listening to this and wondering what is the Counselling Study Resource, what is the Handouts Vault, well, that is part of a paid service that Rory and I offer. As you know, so much of what we do is free, including these podcasts, including the handouts that you can download from the website, including the articles that we put out on a regular basis. But we do have a paid for section where we offer, I guess, more robust resources to accompany you on your counselling journey. And if you want to learn more about that, just listen to the end of the podcast. We give the link of how you can go and find out about the Counselling Study Resource. Now, we have a great question, and one that comes up all the time because it is linked in to those pesky assignments that we have to write from time to time to evidence our understanding and knowledge of what it takes to become a counsellor and a psychotherapist. And it's broken up into 2 parts. The first is compare and contrast. And I know that compare and contrast can bring up fear in many, Rory. It certainly did when I first started studying and I had to compare and contrast, but it gets trickier because this is about comparing and contrasting humanistic models, which are kind of similar in a lot of ways, aren't they, Rory? Can you just share with us the question, how that came in, and then we can kick the ball about a bit?
Yeah, okay. I'll just get my football boots on. Give my ball a kick. Yes, well, so we thank Sergio Arango, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sergio Arango, and Sergio has posted in our Facebook group, hello everyone. Well, hello Sergio. I'm on the certificate course and I have to handle my second essay about compare and contrast 2 approaches in humanistic counselling. I'm struggling on how to do it, and any suggestions would be most welcome. Thank you. Well, here's the suggestion, and I hope it's welcome, mostly. So, there's a couple of things there, compare and contrast. Well, it always gets people, it's what's the same and what's different. So if I had an apple and I had an orange, what would be the same about them? Well, they're both fruits. So that's a compare. Yeah. What, contrast, well, one's got a thick skin on it and is orange in colour, and one has got a thin skin on it and is green. Compare and contrast. That's it. That's the whole thing. What is the same and what is different? And of course, when you're looking at theories, you're having basically to discuss how they're different. what is the same and what is different. But what I want to come on to is humanistic, and it's one of the hardest things to teach. And the reason for that is that one particular theory has kind of hijacked the term humanistic, Ken. And he's hijacked it. It's person-centered therapy. Anybody you ask about person-centered therapy, they'll all say, it's humanistic. Well, it is, because the foundation of it treats people like human beings. It doesn't see them as a illness or a disease or a label or anything other than a human who's struggling. And that is the fundamental terms of humanistic. Unfortunately, and some tutors, I have to say some tutors fall foul of this. So if you're a tutor, get your ears on, is that it's not the only humanistic therapy. Even some taught therapies such as transactional analysis, CBT, and existential therapy are humanistic too. So what's the difference? Right. So a humanistic therapy is where you're not treating someone as a diagnosis, a label, an illness, or anything other than a human being with thoughts and feelings that needs to be approached and worked with respect and dignity and given your full attention. Okay. The difference between therapies is the techniques they use. So person-centered therapy is humanistic because it only uses those things as part of the theory. So it doesn't use any educative techniques, doesn't use anything else but the core conditions or the facilitative conditions. Don't get me started on that. Don't even get me started on that. The facilitative conditions of congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Transactional analysis, modern TA therapists, and modern CBT therapists, I was talking to someone at my practice who's a CBT therapist, would use those. They would treat people as human. However, part of their therapy is to teach the model of it and to be educative. So CBT educates you with techniques about how you can avoid irrational thinking or the recurring thoughts or strategies to avoid feeling stressed. TA is a taught therapy, but it will teach you about how your history, your parenting history, being parenting, or your experience as a child informs your here and now. They're taught models, but they're all humanistic. Now, here's the complicated bit. Ken, you ready for this?
Go ahead.
Okay. So CBT comes from behaviorism. It finds its roots in behaviorism. So in other words, behaviorism was very much things like Pavlov's dogs ring a bell and dogs want the dinner. I don't know if anybody's studied the psychology. And it's developed from a very directive and reductionist idea of the human condition to what we have now, which is that people can have their kind of thoughts changed by using techniques. But it's done in a humanistic way. There'll be no therapist who'd ring a bell or give people electric shocks nowadays, hopefully. And also the same with TA. I was talking to Bob Cook from Manchester Institute of Psychotherapy, and he said that Eric Byrne, who developed transactional analysis, didn't talk anything about building a therapeutic relationship. In fact, he talked about going to the board 3 or 4 times and writing the model down, almost like a teacher. Now, through the years, we've got relational TA, which, here we go, takes a lot of the humanistic ideas of Rogers and builds it into the model of TA. It treats people, understands empathy, attunement, understands that you need to build a relationship first, and then you can then use the model to develop it. So I hope I've explained that clearly enough. It's basically all models of therapy are humanistic. In other words, they approach the client as a human being. But some models have the taught aspects, and it's the taught aspects and what they teach that is the difference, is the contrast.
It is indeed interesting, Rory, and I can understand how it can get tricky to kind of fathom that out, because we're often asked in the comparing and contrasting of different therapeutic models to look for what's the same, what's different. We look to the school where the therapy originated, and it can get confusing and it can get muddled. And I know that you have done an in-depth lecture on this. So anybody that is a member of the Counselling Study resource, if you log in and you click on the lecture library, there is a whole lecture with a handout with a Venn diagram that kind of outlines this step by step. And the Venn diagram is very useful when it comes to assignments, because you can use it as a template really for doing your comparing and contrasting, and hopefully that will help you out. But I think that you explained that very elegantly there, and it's interesting because my daughter is in the education system at the moment, and lo and behold, guess what she's struggling with? Yes, you got it right, compare and contrast. And here's the thing, she knows the stuff. Boy, does she know the stuff. I ask her to tell me about what it is that she needs to compare and contrast. She has a great depth of knowledge of the subject. However, she's not talking about the differences. She kind of gets caught up in telling me all about and going into great depth about what her subjects that she's covering. But comparing and contrasting is about taking one sentence and then comparing it with another sentence. So it's really interesting. As you were saying there, Rory, so basically person-centered therapy is client-led, and whereas behavioral therapy is a talk model where the counsellor teaches the client. And that is comparing and contrasting those two in short sentences.
Yeah, I think you've hit the criteria there, Ken. Well done.
Thank you very much. You're going to put me through.
Yeah. I was just listening to you say about your daughter. Sounds to me your daughter is intellectualizing it. So and that's something a lot of students do. They're so bright and so knowledgeable that actually compare and contrast is a very simple. It's very simple. It's literally like picking an apple and orange up. And sometimes we forget that part of the criteria is just quite simple. It's a simple learning task. What's the same and what's different? You'd ask a child that. What's the same and what's different? Same with the theory. And sometimes I think that, students who are really switched on struggle simplifying it.
I agree with you. The advice that I gave to my daughter is pretend you're explaining this to a 4-year-old and they're hearing it for the very first time. Yeah. And I think that's a great tip, that. And often when we're writing those assignments, we feel a need to demonstrate we really know what we're talking about, that we listened well in the lectures, that we've studied and read the books. And we can overcomplicate it, we can over-intellectualize it, and it's about taking it to its lowest common denominator and explaining it as if to a 4-year-old.
Yeah, and I'll share this about criteria because I recently asked the question what people struggle with. And, if someone, I used to say to my students, just tell me the colour of the wall. And they'd go, look, the wall's white in the classroom. I said, that's it. That's the question. What colour is the wall? And if I ask that in a lecture, in a criteria-based thing, I'd say the equivalent in counselling, what colour's the wall? People would give me an architectural plan, the bricks, the paint pigments, the how many chairs are in there. It's not what's being asked. What colour is the wall? Just tell me that. Compare and contrast. What is the same? What is different? In fact, one of the compares and contrast is two theorists, different names. A contrast is one was Carl Rogers and the other was Albert Ellis.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a correct answer. That cannot be marked wrong. There you go. The simpler the better. Huh? The simpler the better. And I guess what is similar is that they are both therapeutic models that are used for counselling. There you have it. It's there's all everybody's assignment being written as you listen to this podcast. But it's been a great episode. Episode 60. We kicked off by looking at that self-care and how important that is to us as counsellors, psychotherapists, and routes that we can take, things that we can do about that. Looking at Theory with Rory, cognitive development in children, really insightful. Thank you very much, Rory, for that great handout you've made on the website, Counselling Tutor, podcast tab, episode 60. Go and download that and get your bonus there as well. And then, of course, we've closed by looking at that familiar friend of ours, hated by many, I hasten to say, that compare and contrast, and giving a bit of a focus on humanistic models. That kind of brings us to the end of episode 60, Rory.
Yes, it does. And what a great episode it's been. And I'm going to see which one I want when I get an apple or an orange when I finish this podcast. I'm going to compare and contrast. And when I eat it, I may evaluate. So as always, stay grounded, stay safe.
If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Lees-Oakes to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.